is about Asia as a comedy, and I'll deal with Asian integration here. How is Asia being taught together into a unit? A bit in the history and also nowadays. So we have existing Asian integration. Some countries, but not all, but some countries are called together to attend organizations and meetings and create trade agreements and investment agreements and so on. And within this discussion, Asia basically means countries that grow or have grown fast at some point of their history. But you can also add here countries that are already affluent. Japan is here because it has grown fast in its history and it is affluent. But lately, Australia and New Zealand have been added here into this Asian narrative for specific reasons. They could be added because they were affluent, or if they are politically important, and I'm here thinking about Russia, which enters Asian organizations. Also, it is not too affluent, and its economy is not too well, but it is politically important here. But there are countries like North Korea, which does not belong to Asia because it is not accepted into these Asian organizations. It is not only the conflict with South Korea or USA. It is also the fact that it's poor and it does not develop. It is not part of this romantic narrative. And you need to be part, in one way or another, you need to be part of this romantic narrative to become a full-fledged Asian member. And the actors of these narratives are basically politicians. And politicians basically often like to talk comedies. But we get together, we work together, and we solve problems, and we go on happily forward. This is a comedy. Comedies are not necessarily funny. This is simply the discussion of integration, working together. So it goes. Affluent Asia, we have these miracles, Southeast Asia first, then China also. India used to be kept outside of Asian discussions until its economy started to grow fast in the 1990s. And then it started to be accepted into Asian organizations. Being named as Asia, Russia, as I said, USA are also to a certain extent here now, a very wide specific level. And potentially the whole rest of the world can be placed here. If you think of a very long time. Probably will not ever happen. Basically anything can actually be named into Asia. If Russia and USA can be considered as Asian countries, almost anything can. These integrative ideas. Japan used to be a very active actor in these ideas, creating proposals and leading not only from behind but also in front. In 1968, Japan made a so-called proposal of a Pacific Free Trade Area, which would have been composed of Japan, Australia, New Zealand, USA and Canada. So at this time you didn't talk much about Asia. 1968 Asia still was its rapid growth had not yet begun. But because European economic community had been created, and Europe acted as a model of regional integration. What to do here in the Pacific area was the problem, and because there were only 5 industrialized countries there at the moment, Japan, USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, let's integrate them. This proposal never went forward. This kind of free trade area was never established. But it was a kind of interesting and revolutionary idea at the time. So discussion continued among scholars and among business people. For more than a decade, until in 1981, a so-called Pacific Economic Cooperation Council was created. Again, it is Pacific, not Asian. So it's Canada, USA, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and ASEAN. You now start to have other countries besides Japan also entering organizations, but the name is still about the Pacific. Nowadays, this Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, I did not check which actually are the members. But nowadays it has lots of members from Latin America, Chile, Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia, Mexico. And you have Russia and China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and so on. Small Pacific islands are also members here. The normal pattern in these Asian Pacific integration systems is that you start with a small group of countries and there's expansion and you invite more and more members. Because there's interest by many countries to join. And European style of integration is different. It's difficult to join. You have to fulfill certain criteria. You have to be like a European country until you can join. Here it is different. Anybody can basically join if there are good reasons enough. Even though your economic system, your political system is different. Ten years go by. Decided 1989, and actually meetings were taken in 1990 first time. Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, also still existing. The original members were USA, Canada, Japan, South Korea, ASEAN countries, Australia, New Zealand. You started from them because they were industrialized and strong and affluent. Then you added into this structure first China. Then you added a British colony with the name Hong Kong, China. The Hong Kong people wanted to get in because they were big traders at this time already. But now you have to take China under consideration. Under which kind of rules would China permit the entering of Hong Kong? And this formula, Hong Kong, China, was suitable. As you remember from the first lecture, names are important in politics. And if you create the correct name, then you can do things. An old Confucian slogan. And also the Taiwanese wanted to join. And so they were able to join with the name Chinese Taipei. In 1991. And because of this history, the members are not called states. They always appear as economies. We have USA as an economy, and we have Hong Kong as an economy there. Again, you have to have the correct concepts, and then you can do things. And here we had for the first time Asia in the name of these integrated organizations. And again, the reason is China. It was so continental. And probably the Chinese themselves also did not want to simply be a part of this existing Pacific system. Because Pacific refers to this kind of old USA, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand system. The Pacific contains still this kind of image. So Asia was added also to the name of this organization. Nowadays contains more countries: Mexico, Peru, Chile, Papua New Guinea from here also, Vietnam, and Russia. So it also expands and becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. When they become too big, some countries start to feel that you want to have a smaller grouping, where it would be easier to discuss. ASEM, Asia-Europe meeting was created in 1996 with Southeast Asian Singaporean basically initiative. USA, Canada and so on were left out. And this is the first time in world history when Europe and Asia met on an equal basis. At that time they were still far away from each other. Well, not Chinese map is perhaps not completely correct, but anyway, the eastern and western ends of the continent met because these were the two strong technological economic powerhouses of the continent, and the rest was much weaker. So you integrate only with the strong. The next one will take place in Vientiane, Laos. ASEM meets every 2 years. But nowadays, ASEM is already so big. Asia and Europe touch each other again. Russia is a member, Australia, New Zealand are members. They are now Asian members, not European members. India, Pakistan are members, Mongolia also. It also expands. You always start from small and then you expand. And people are lining up to join in. There's an interesting history, a symbolical history of these Asia-Europe meetings. Because of this old colony situation, there's kind of competition between European and Asian states how to depict, how to symbolize this mutual being together. It's the first ASEM symbol. You have a blue hand symbolizing Europe and a yellow hand symbolizing Asia coming together. Well, coming together is integration. These form the letter A. Here you also have letter A starting it. A is about Asia. Then you have M in this kind of form. And European E is pushed into a narrow place between all this Asianness. Europeans did not like it. They wanted a new logo. This was made in London. There's an agreement that blue color means Europe and yellow and red means basically Asia. So you have Asia bursting as a romantic narrative upwards and tragic narratives downwards. It goes both ways. And you have European Union solemnly circling, guiding and controlling these Asian happenings. Okay, Koreans in 2000 made this kind of logo. Where you have, this has to be Europe because it is silver, and this has to be Asia because it is gold. Europe going down, Asia going up. Copenhagen 2002, the Danish made a simple logo. They didn't put much money on this. You have all colors here, but it's thicker in the European end and narrower in the Asian end. Well, the Asian people began to get tired of this competition. They announced a big worldwide competition to create a new beautiful logo. And this is the winner of this competition. Over 200 different logos came. This was used first time in Helsinki, Finland, 2006. It was decided officially already in 2003, but in practice changes in logo have gone on. I think this is nice. There's part of this A is composed by a brush, stroke. Then here we have the E. It forms the A, which should be acceptable for the Asians. But you can see the E also here clearly. It should be acceptable for the Europeans. But the Vietnamese wanted to create their own logo. But this goes against the rules. If it had gone like in the way of the competitions, you should have here yellow up and blue down. But they wanted to be humble and place Asia down and Europe up for some reason. Brussels, then we have Beijing. They again created a new logo. Lots of yellow and red there. Not the European colors except in the text. But Asia down and Europe up here, again a polite one. And Brussels here, they wanted to use the old logo. I don't know what the Laos people will do when they have a new logo or not. But this is now getting slower. So there's agreement more or less about the logo. No more competition so much. And a new organization. There are lots of organizations here in Asia Pacific. I touch only a few. There's lots of integration. There's bilateral country-to-country agreements, free trade areas, and so on. I touch only a few of them. East Asia Summit. Many Asian countries already wanted to create an East Asian organization. Not USA with them, not with the Europeans, they only. In the 1980s, 1990s, basically 1990s. That time USA was strongly opposed. And Japanese leadership didn't want to go along with this kind of organization, as long as USA was opposing. But by 2004, they had already become stronger and stronger. Didn't need to obey so much what USA was saying. So an East Asia Summit was created in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in 2005. At the instigation of Abdullah Balawi, who was the Prime Minister of Malaysia at this time. Here you don't have USA anymore. You have Japan, South Korea, China, ASEAN countries. But, and this was the idea that most Southeast Asian countries and China were proposing first, only these. But as a kind of payment for the fact that USA was left out, Japan strongly then brought in Australia, New Zealand, and India. so that this became a larger organization than before. Because in this place only, by this time, China would already have been quite dominating. So Australia, New Zealand there as an addition, and India are there to balance Chinese domination from a Japanese point of view. And nowadays, what do we have in East Asian Summit? We have Americans as Asian heads of state and Russians as an Asian country participating. So it is also expanding. Europeans also want to join. European Union is in the waiting list to become a member. I think by this time we can say that the center of the world is no more in the North Atlantic. This is where countries, states want to gather. These are the organizations the countries want to join. So I think by now, by 2011, 2012, the center of the world is already here. So the world is changing. And I think within 10 years we will have a new organization here, because this is expanding so big that it will not function too well anymore. A new organization every 10 years, then it expands and a new one will be created. That has been the pattern for the past decades. Then I will go to a few speeches by politicians. I have chosen some Japanese and a couple of Chinese speeches, where they all discuss Asia, but also put forward their own agenda. And what kind of changes can we find here? And these are basically always taught as comedies. Let's come together, help each other, be friendly, and go on living happy life from now on. But you can see in these speeches also quite clear change between the Japanese and Chinese relations. And because it is a big drama, let's see how it is being played in these speeches. And I start with Koizumi Junichiro for specific reasons. One reason is that he was a very long time Prime Minister. And no Japanese Prime Minister has been able to stay in office for so long after him. And he uses Asian Shinseiki, the new century of Asia, because this is the expression that also comedic narratives have to be based on nowadays. You have to talk how good Asia is. This new century is not in the future. It is taking place now. We are already living the new Asian century. Asian GDP の約6割を占める日本. Japan occupies 60% of the total GDP of Asia. Koizumi was the last prime minister who would present Japan as a great power. I don't know how this, and this is in 2002, I don't know how this was calculated, and this probably was a mistaken number even at this time. But yeah, this is only 10 years ago. And this is the last time this could be done. But because he could present Japan as a great power, he could also speak great power speech in his presentations. One more thing. I may make mistakes in pronouncing these, because I don't listen so much political speeches from TV, I read only text. If you notice 間違えた読み方に気がついたら、 僕の読み方を直してください。日本は長年の間、世界最大の援助国の座を占めてきています。Japan has been for many years occupying the place of the biggest development help giving country in the world. And that's what Koizumi also promised to Southeast Asian countries in her trip to ASEAN this year. Japan still had resources by this time. It was easy to promise. 共に歩み、共に進む。Let's walk together and proceed together. That's what he said. Tomo, in diplomatic language, is a special word. It does not mean friendship in the sense that you and I can be friends. We can be friends. Because this would be an emotional relationship. In diplomatic speech, friendship means a contractual, formal relations. It has been for about 200 years a thing that great powers offer to weaker powers. They say, let us be friends, and create a friendship situation. So friendship is a big power speech. So Koizumi still was able to speak in this way in 2002. Here we go a few years forward to his foreign minister, Aso Taro. Koizumi's foreign minister and Abe's foreign minister in 2006. He also was a prime minister in 2009, but at that time he did not make any big Asia speeches, but he did this one in 2005, which is also interesting. But this time it was no more possible to simply say that Japan is 60% of the whole Asia. The numbers have already changed, and the Japanese slow growth continued, and Asian growth was fast. So what to do? The Japanese dilemma was, they wanted to be a leader, but how to express it? So Aso's solution was to say like this. 日本はアジアの実践的先駆者 thought leader たるべし He picked from English, from business English, this kind of expression and placed it simply as English into his speech. Thought leader means an ideal leader. Not the one who commands, but somebody who has better ideas than the others. And that's why the others want to follow this kind of leader. He also says about Asians like this. アジア人とは楽観論者の別名。明日は今日より必ずや明るくなるとそう固く信じて疑わない。Asians are optimists. An optimist is a different name for Asian. They believe in these romances, and tomorrow will be necessarily bright. That's what the Asians believe very strongly, and they don't question this system. 日本人の含めます。Japanese also belong to these Asians who are optimists. Then 若い民主主義はないし、民主主義を喫求でしたっけ、喫求しようとする若いハートは由来激しやすいのです。Asians and Japanese are optimists, but Japan has been having democracy for a long time, and Asians are all new democracies. And all of them are even not yet democratic countries. So they are young hearts on the road of democratic development. And their hearts tend to be hot and fiery and passionate. And Japan is an old, experienced country who has experienced it all. It has experienced nationalism and militarism and so on, bad things and good things. Japan can teach and tell the Asian countries that take it easy and do this and this and that. Do what the Japanese have done and everything will be okay. So this is a thought leader, not so much a political leader, which would now be quite difficult, not an economic leader, because the economy is not going on so fast. China's one is going fast, but a thought leader. That is a role left for Japan in this argumentation. New Prime Minister, Abe Shinzo, 2006-2007. His administration decided, well, Koizumi's administration was confrontational towards China. Abe went, after becoming Prime Minister, very fast to China to heal the relationship. But then he started with his government building a kind of international coalition to sort of control China. And this is a speech that he made as Prime Minister in the Indian Parliament. Chiriteki kyokai yo tsuki yaboru kakudai Asia. A broader Asia that is breaking the boundaries of geography. So he is here making a new interpretation of Asia. Kakudai Asia wa beikoku ya goshu wa makikomi Taiheiyo Gen-iki ni made oyobu kodai na network to seichiasu. So it takes here the Pacific, which is the old Japanese basis of USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, so on. And simply saying, USA is an Asian country, and Australia is an Asian country, and so on. Nothing problematic with this. You can nominalistically enlarge the meaning of the concept of Asia. Then he continues. Eurasia tairiku no gaien ni sotte jiyu to han-ei no ko to yoberu ichien. A region called the Arc of Freedom and Prosperity will be formed along the outer rim of the Eurasian continent. And this was a politically problematic thing, because the idea expressed in this speech was that Japan, USA, New Zealand, Australia, and then also India create a specific relationship between each other. Freedom and prosperity, democracy, and so on. So this was a kind of encirclement of China, one kind of policy attempt, which both had nostalgic elements, the Pacific, referring back to the 1980s, and then India, a new rising country there. Well, the Japanese Prime Minister this time lasted only about a year in the office. So this policy was not put forward, and China of course knew what was taking place in here and acted diplomatically behind the scenes strongly. So this was not continued, this line, this confrontational line. We get Fukuda Yasuo, a new Prime Minister. He was the son of Fukuda Takeo, who in the 1970s created the so-called Fukuda Doctrine, which opened good relations between Japan and ASEAN. He simply promised lots of help to ASEAN and created a specific relationship between Japan and ASEAN at this time. It was a big success. And investment from Japan started flowing to ASEAN, and ASEAN started growing and so on. So he had a father who had made a big thing, and he had been a child at the time his father had been in power. What does he say in 2008? Taiheion aikai naru hie. Waiting for the day when the Pacific will become an inner sea, an inland sea, like the Mediterranean is in the Europe. This is an expression used in the 1980s. Then they were talking about the Pacific as an inland sea or Pacific lake. We are coming to a period when the long rule of the Liberal Democratic Party is coming to an end. And the leadership is becoming afraid of elections. And the LDP politicians are feeling themselves quite weak. They know that they have to try to create some kind of foreign policy doctrine for Japan, but don't feel too much power to do it. So nostalgic, looking back to a period when you did not have China there. You had Japan, USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia. A simple, easy system comes up in these speeches. Continue, Asia Taiheion no kunigunin ga nani ka to mondai ni butsukatta toki ni Nihon wa dou shita darou to keiken no katari ga aru nakama no you ni omoeru. Watakushi wa Nihon wa souyu kuni de areba ii to omoimasu. So this against is the kind of thought leader position was very soft. Even the term leadership or leader is not used here anymore. It is soft and nostalgic. This is like a senpai, older colleague position now. And nothing very concrete. So LDP period ended in Japanese politics. We get Japan Democratic Party and its first Prime Minister, Hatoyama Yukio. Again, a descendant of a previous famous Japanese politician and so on. But this party had great plans for renovating Japan in the beginning. And also new foreign policy was contemplated. In his first policy speech, outlining his government's future policy, he said like this: 21世紀にアメリカと中国という2つの大国の間. So he now did not anymore place Japan into the role of a big power. China and USA were placed on this role. This means that there would be no more necessary competition in terms of the leadership role. You simply leave that to USA on one hand and China on the other hand. But you don't define Japan exactly. But only it is somewhere between there. しかし、日本の国民と日本文化が世界社会に、果たせる役割は決して小さくないはずです。But Japan still continues to be very important there. China continues to grow very fast. It's still about 10% a year. So there's simply no other way than to simply bow a little and let China continue its growth. Confrontational position would not have been possible in this situation. Then how does he create his Asia policy? Bummei no Hakubutsukan is what he called Japan. Asia kakkoku no bunka no sono ruutsu o midassu koto ga dekimasu. Higashi Asia wa bunka yūgōtai. He has read Ogakura Tenshin. It is good to know the history of Asian rhetoric and discussion so that you can see what is being referred to. Tenshin spoke in a situation where he had to create out of nothing a new kind of image of Asia, and that was culture. And that's what Hatoyama is also doing. So he goes to the culture. Politics is difficult, economy is also difficult. Let's go to culture. And saying that Japan is a museum of Asian civilization, and that you can find in Japan the roots of all Asian civilizations. And that Eastern Asia is a body, unity of cultural assimilation. And the following アジア人の特徴の一つは西洋的な二元論とは異なり、自分と他者、人間と自然との違いを対立的に認識するのではなく、それらの同一性に重きを置く。Again, 100-year-old argumentation that Chinese people don't understand the world by way of dualism between the self and the others, humans and nature. But Asians do. Asians can understand unity. So this is old. Then about the new, 日本の若者がアジアに渡り、友情を育む。これを覚えるのは苦労しました。チャンスを与えると必要。当たることも必要。多重多様のアジアの多種多様。そう。多種多様のアジアの語源の学べるのも必要です。So let's send Japanese youth out from the closed Japanese educational system to Asian countries, learn Asian languages, and also create, for a long time also, friendship between Asian countries. And this is sensible policy. This is what should be done. I don't know how many Japanese actually go to China and Korea and Vietnam and so on, but this is what Japanese should be wise to do in the future. 文化の共同体の基礎 The basis of culture will form the basis of this community. 東アジア共同体の、思想すなわち構想東アジア共同体の構想すなわち開かれた地域協力の原則です。So let's build an East Asian community based on these Asian values. Not make it European style with strict borders, keep it open, because the expectation is whatever you create, it will expand and more countries want to join. But let's create an East Asian community. 21世紀の共同体モデルを東アジアから提案する。So European model was the 20th century model. 21st century model will be from East Asia, created by Japan. So yet Japan is doing something active, but with the help of all of these Asian countries. Well, it was a nice idea. It was good. I think this is sensible. But then you have all kinds of border conflicts and difficulties within the Japanese economy, and Hatoyama leaving out, and his followers Kan Naoto and Noda Yoshihiko. I have not seen any specific, active, interesting Asia proposals. The Japan Democratic Party is also in troubles nowadays. Their first new attempts never came to very much. Let's see a couple of Chinese arguments, an older one and a newer one. First from Wen Jiabao, the Prime Minister, and they stay in power a decade and create policies. In next month there is supposed to be a meeting of the Chinese Communist Party, and he's expected sooner or later to step down. But will it take part in this year or next year, we will see. Anyway, in 2005, in Kuala Lumpur, meeting with ASEAN countries, he still talked mostly about China, and saying that China will remain an underdeveloped state for a long period of time. But looking ahead, we are full of confidence. Our goal is to double China's per capita GDP to 2000 by 2010, and after that to bring China's per capita GDP to US $3,000 in another 15 years. This will turn China into a country of moderate prosperity. So this is still a romantic narrative. He's still arguing that China is fairly low, and it is coming up. And this is not leader's speech. But when we go forward to last year, from this year I didn't find any similar Asia speeches because of the approaching transition. But last year in Boa Forum for Asia, he spoke like this: Asians belong to one family, so there's unity. And the people of Asia have an unyielding spirit of seeking self-improvement. You praise the Asians, how good the Asians are. This is a necessary beginning for any good leadership speech. Then you have interdependence. China cannot achieve development and prosperity without Asia. Asia needs China for development and prosperity. The destiny brings China and Asia together. In the past 10 years, China's economy has enjoyed rapid and sustained growth. China's economic strength, comprehensive national strength, and living standards have all reached a new height. He adds that China still has a way to go, but he's now talking about from position of strength. That China is now successful, and you can say it openly. And he says we will make more investments in Asia and the emerging market. Money will flow out from China to the rest of Asia, just like Japanese used to say in the 1980s and still in the 1990s. And at the same time give more economic assistance to developing countries in Asia. China has graduated from receiving development aid to giving it, and it is also an important status change. And China will always be a good neighbor, good friend, and good partner of other Asian countries. And we have full confidence in an even brighter future of Asia. Let's work together to make it reality. China is now assuming the position of a leader in Asia. And it is doing it now. Well, it is a transition. This takes place. These are the comedic speeches. At the same time, we have also other narratives. We have the narrative of territorial conflict, which is a tragedy. Japan with Russia, South Korea, and China, and still very strong. South Korea with North Korea, some also with China. China with almost practically all countries around its borders, from Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Southeast Asian countries to India, not with Russia. That is the only peaceful area there. And the Vietnamese with China, and practically all other ASEAN countries in the maritime area and so on. We have this narrative of conflict. It is separate. And this comedic narrative of Asian integration also is going on. I think that this narrative is the basic continuing narrative. But Asian integration cannot be very deep in the European way, as long as Asian countries are growing with so different speeds. Because the position of any single country, and especially that of China, changes in 10 years so much that you don't want to create too close, too tight organizations with specific rules. And guess about the future. When the Chinese economic growth comes to a fairly low levels, where Japan is now, after 10, 20 years, when the Chinese population is aging fast and not so many babies are born, and the growth is about 1 or 2% a year, then China will also become interested in this kind of integrated systems. But now it is a lose-lose common system and China as the leader. That is the position now. Basically, everything is still going on well here in Asia. I don't expect any big conflict, but there will be lots of small conflicts, exactly because the balance between countries is changing. If there was no Senkaku, Diaoyutai dispute between China and Japan now, there would be something else. Because states use these conflicts, these quarrels, as way of adjusting their mutual balance and their positions. There would be something else. And I don't think this area can get rid of these kind of conflicts until there's much less economic growth and much more wealth. But probably that day will approach while you are still living. I believe so, and hope so. So, this is the end of this lecture series. I'm quite confident this comedic, optimistic narrative will go on. And Asian integration will become perhaps stronger somewhere in the future, but not for the time being. That's it. This will be the situation. China leading, not here, but lower and lower for the next decades. Commento, hihan, shitsuman, arimasu ka?